He pointed at the TV remote and shouted, "You took it! You always steal things!" My son, David, my only boy, called me a thief, not in private, not in anger, but calmly, in front of his wife, his kids, and a dinner guest like I was some petty criminal. I stood there holding my tea, heart pounding, face flushed with shame. I didn't care about the remote. What broke me was the look in his eyes. Disgust, dismissal, as if I didn't raise him, as if I hadn't built his entire life with these hands. There was a time, God help me, when I thought David was the best thing I ever did. I remember the day Marjorie told me she was pregnant. I was laying roof tiles in the dead of summer, shirt soaked through, back aching. She pulled up in our old Chevy, holding her stomach like she had a secret. When she said the words, "We're having a baby," I dropped my hammer right there on the shingles, laughed so hard I nearly rolled off the roof. We were young then, poor but full of grit. I took every extra shift I could find, poured concrete in the morning, hauled lumber by night. My hands were always cracked and bleeding, but I came home with a smile, because Marjorie would be waiting in the kitchen, belly round, humming Patsy Cline while stirring stew. We didn't have much, but what we had, we gave to David. From the moment he was born, I swore he'd have a better life than I did. No second-hand clothes, no empty fridge, no watching his father beg for hours at the mill. That boy was going to grow up with books, bikes, birthday parties. I built a wooden cradle with my own hands, rocked him to sleep every night for months. As a toddler, David followed me everywhere, little boots stomping through sawdust, asking questions with that curious gleam. "What's this, Dad? Why's the nail bent? Can I help?" He was always watching me, learning. I was proud of that. I thought maybe he'd grow into a man with calloused hands and a strong back too. But Marjorie had other ideas. She wanted him to go further. College, suits, a desk job. She was right, of course. She always was. We saved everything. Skipped vacations. Didn't upgrade the car. When David wanted piano lessons at 10, we found a way. I built a small workshop in the backyard and sold wood carvings at the weekend market to cover the bills. He was good too, clever with his fingers. I used to sit on the porch in the evenings, listening to him play while Marjorie knitted beside me. It felt like peace. High school flew by. Honor roll, debate club, scholarship interviews. I was bursting with pride. When he got into a good university, we cried, all three of us. I remember pressing a check into his hand. Our savings, every last cent not nailed down to the mortgage. "Don't worry about paying us back," I said. "Just do good." And he did. He graduated with honors, got a job in tech, bought a condo, then met Clara. At the wedding, he toasted Marjorie and me. "None of this," he said, "none of me, would exist without these two people." He was smiling when he said it, looking at us with gratitude. So what happened? That's the part that keeps me up at night. It didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a switch. It was slower, like a leak in a pipe you don't notice until the rot sets in. After Marjorie passed, everything felt colder. The warmth in our little triangle of a family disappeared. David stopped visiting every weekend, said he was busy, then every 2 weeks, then holidays only. Clara was always polite but distant, smiled with her mouth, not her eyes. Still, I didn't think much of it. Grief changes people. I thought time would heal, but I was wrong. The day Marjorie died, a part of David changed, or maybe I just started seeing the parts I'd ignored. I spent the first year trying to keep busy, volunteering at the church, fixing up the house. But it was clear I didn't fit in his world anymore. His new apartment had white walls, glass furniture, and no place for old work boots. Still, I told myself it was natural. Kids grow up, they drift. That's life. Then came the suggestion, "Why don't you move in with us, Dad? We've got the space." Clara said it might be good for everyone. He looked me in the eye, and I believed him. I didn't realize then that I was walking into a house that wasn't mine, that I would never really be welcome in those rooms. But back in those earlier years, when David was just a boy who clung to my hand at the fair, who cried when I left for work, who beamed when I clapped at his recitals, I thought I'd done everything right. I still remember the way he'd crawl into our bed on stormy nights. Marjorie would pretend to be asleep while he tucked himself under my arm, whispering, "Are you scared too, Dad?" And I'd whisper back, "Not when you're here, buddy." How do you go from that to being called a thief? That's the question I ask myself every night. At first, I thought it was just stress. New job, new house, new baby on the way. That's what I told myself when David started pulling away. When his texts got shorter, when calls turned into voicemails. I blamed the clock, the commute, the chaos of parenthood, anything but him. But the little things started piling up. It began with tone. Not words, but how he said them. "Dad, don't touch that. That's not how we do it here." Or the worst one. "We've got it covered, okay?" Always polite enough to seem reasonable. But there was this tightness in his jaw, a coldness in his eyes. Like I was a guest overstaying my welcome in a house I helped him buy. I remember offering to fix a loose cabinet door in their kitchen one morning. Clara had just stepped out with the baby, and I figured I'd be useful. The hinge was barely holding. I got my old toolkit from the garage, sat down with a screwdriver. David walked in, saw me on the floor, and froze. "What are you doing?" he asked too quickly. "Just tightening this hinge. It was swinging loose." He sighed, long and heavy, like I'd broken something. "Dad, we have a handyman. You don't need to mess with that." Mess with it? I built the damn cabinet. I put the screwdriver down and said nothing. Thought maybe I'd overstepped. But that was the first time I realized I wasn't trusted anymore. Not with tools, not with space, not even with intentions. Then there was the thermostat. Sounds silly, I know. But one night, it dropped into the low 50s outside. I walked past the hallway unit and noticed it was set at 65. The baby was teething, Clara was asleep, and the floorboards creaked like ice. I nudged it up to 69. An hour later, David walked out of his room, eyes half closed, looked at the screen, and clicked it back down without a word, not a glance in my direction. The next morning, he mentioned casually, "Please don't touch the thermostat. It messes with the system." It wasn't just about the heat. It was about control. The real shift came when Clara's parents visited. They arrived with expensive wine, new baby toys, and a quiet arrogance that filled the room like perfume. They called David "sweetheart" and Clara "my little gem." When I offered to set the table, Clara smiled faintly and said, "Oh, we have a system." I ended up sitting in the living room with a glass of water, watching them laugh from a distance in the kitchen I used to cook Sunday breakfasts in. Her father talked about investments and trusts and real estate portfolios. I nodded along, said little. He asked if I'd gotten around to estate planning. I said, "My affairs are in order." His smile didn't reach his eyes. After they left, David said to me, "Clara's dad thinks we should talk about long-term plans. You know, about the house and stuff, just so everything's smooth when the time comes." When the time comes? I wanted to ask. What time? My death? My funeral? But I just nodded. Inside, I felt something crack. From that moment, it was like a silent campaign began. My tools were moved from the garage to the shed to make space. My armchair ended up in the guest room. David started keeping my medication in a labeled box on a high shelf for safety. And Clara began referring to me in the third person when speaking to the baby. "Say goodnight to Grandpa. He's going to bed early, aren't you, Grandpa?" Like I wasn't in the room. I noticed how the mail started being sorted before I could touch it. How my name wasn't included on the Wi-Fi password change. How every part of the home slowly stopped being mine. One Sunday, they hosted a brunch. A few neighbors and Clara's cousin came. I sat quietly, sipping coffee. David stood in the doorway, laughing, holding court like a man who had everything under control. Someone asked him about the house. "Oh yeah," he said casually. "We're thinking of remodeling next year. Add a second story. Make it ours. Make it ours." Not once did he say, "my dad's house." Not once did he mention that the down payment came from the equity I cashed out after selling the home Marjorie and I lived in for 32 years. And then came the sighs. Whenever I spoke up about the news, the past, even a joke, Clara would give this little closed lip smile. David would rub the back of his neck. They'd nod politely, then change the subject. Once, I told a story about Marjorie at dinner. Something sweet. How she used to sing while washing dishes. Clara cleared her throat and said, "David doesn't really like talking about the past, Dad. It makes him emotional." Emotional? David didn't even look up, just pushed a green bean around his plate. That's when I realized I wasn't just being tolerated. I was being managed. They weren't building a life around me. They were slowly moving me out of it. With soft voices, patient sighs, and polite corrections. They were turning me from a father into a burden, and I let them. Because I loved my son, because I thought if I stayed quiet, respectful, helpful, they'd see my worth again. But instead, they saw an old man they could quietly erase, and soon I would discover just how far they'd already gone to do exactly that. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. 3 weeks after David's birthday. I'd given him a framed photo of Marjorie holding him as a baby, one he hadn't seen before. I'd found it while going through an old box in the attic. I thought it would mean something. Instead, he glanced at it and said, "Thanks," before setting it on a side table and never mentioning it again. That day, they were hosting a barbecue. Friends, neighbors, Clara's sister, and her new fiancé. I helped set up the folding chairs and carried out trays of ribs and corn. No one asked me to. I just figured it's what Marjorie would have done. She believed in service, in being useful. The yard buzzed with laughter, drinks clinking, the smell of charcoal in the air. I stood near the grill, mostly quiet, watching the kids run barefoot through the lawn I helped mow last week. Clara was handing out lemonade, David chatting with some guy in real estate about market trends. I was sipping iced tea when I heard it. Clara's voice, clear and sharp, floated from the porch. She was speaking to her sister. "We're probably going to move him out by fall. David says it's better to do it sooner, before things get worse." Her sister leaned in. "You mean, like a home?" Clara nodded. "We've been looking at a few places. Assisted living, but nice ones. He's starting to forget things. The other day he left the stove on. That never happened." My fingers clenched around the glass, my ears burned. Then David walked over with 2 plates of food, handed one to Clara, kissed her cheek. She smiled like nothing had just been said. I stepped forward. "What's this about moving me?" I asked. They both froze. David's face twitched just slightly before smoothing into calm. "Dad, we were going to talk to you about it. Later." Clara didn't meet my eyes. I laughed, short and sharp. "Talk to me about what? About shoving me into some place like I'm a piece of old furniture?" "Don't be dramatic," he said. "We just think it might be safer." "For who?" I barked. Heads turned. The yard grew quiet. I could feel the stares. Friends I didn't know well, neighbors I only waved to, watching me like I was some unstable relic. David stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Can we not do this here?" "No, let's do it right here," I said, my voice cracking. "Tell everyone how the man who gave you everything is now an inconvenience." Clara placed a hand on his arm, but he shook it off. "You don't understand, Dad. You leave things unlocked. You wander. You've been getting confused." "I forgot one grocery list," I said. "One." He hesitated, then muttered, "Clara found your bank statements in the trash." I blinked. "What?" "I mean, why were they in the recycling? That's personal information, Dad." "Because I shredded them first," I said. "Then I threw them out." "What? Now that's a sign of dementia?" Clara finally spoke, her voice too sweet. "We're just thinking about what's best for you." "No," I said, quieter now. "You're thinking about what's easiest for you." Silence. No one said a word. I looked around and saw a dozen people pretending not to listen. Some turned their backs, others stared into their plates. But no one, not one person, came to my defense. David crossed his arms. "This isn't how we wanted this to happen." "But it is happening, isn't it?" I said. "You've already picked out a place, haven't you? Already started the paperwork?" He didn't answer. I shook my head, heart pounding. "And the house? What happens to that when I'm gone, huh? Do you sell it? Gut it? Flip it for profit like some cheap investment?" Still no answer. My chest felt tight. I wanted to sit, to scream, to cry, but I stood there, because pride is sometimes the only thing an old man has left. I looked at Clara, who wouldn't meet my eyes. At David, who once clung to my hand when crossing the street, who used to ask me to tuck him in twice, just so he could hear me sing. Now he stood with the same mouth, the same eyes, but no trace of that boy left. "You know," I said, "your mother always said you were her soft spot. She said you had her heart, but I guess that's what I get for raising you to be too comfortable." He flinched. "I'm not senile," I added. "I'm not lost. I'm grieving, and I'm old, but I still see what's happening." With that, I turned and walked inside. No one followed me. No one stopped me. I sat in the guest room, my room, though they never called it that, hands trembling. I stared at the photo I'd given David, still resting crookedly on the side table. I realized then it wasn't just neglect anymore. It was a betrayal. They weren't just waiting for me to fade. They were pushing me off the stage. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a father. I felt like a burden. But that feeling didn't last, because pain, when it festers long enough, becomes something else. It becomes clarity. And that was the moment I began watching them more closely, not with love, but with eyes wide open. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay on the narrow bed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet hum of the central air and the occasional creak of the house I once called home. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Clara's voice again. We're probably going to move him out by fall. It looped like a broken record, steady and cruel. Around 3 in the morning, I got up to use the bathroom. As I walked down the hall, I noticed David's office door was cracked open. That was odd. He usually locked it. I paused. I don't know what made me step inside. Maybe instinct. Maybe the same curiosity that helped me once build shelves without a blueprint. What I saw knocked the breath out of me. On his desk was a stack of printed emails. The top one had the subject line, Assisted Living Transition Plan, Preliminary Steps. Below it, more documents, pamphlets, cost breakdowns, timelines, and a bright yellow sticky note with the words, Confirm Power of Attorney by Sept 15. I picked it up with shaking fingers. Power of attorney. He hadn't said a word, not one word, but here it was, in black and white. I heard a creak on the stairs and quickly backed out of the room, heart pounding. I barely slept the rest of the night. The next morning I acted normal. I poured my coffee, sat at the kitchen table, even asked Clara about the baby's teething. She smiled, too wide. Oh, he's fine now. Slept through the night. David joined us a moment later, phone in hand. Hey, Dad. Morning. I looked at him, and for the first time I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger in my kitchen, plotting how to move me like a pawn off the board. Later that day, while they were out running errands, I searched the drawers of my own nightstand, the one they insisted on moving into the guest room. I still had my documents in there, the deed to the house, old insurance forms, a copy of my will from years ago. But then I noticed something else, a white envelope addressed to me, but unopened. Inside was a letter from my financial advisor, dated 2 months ago. It detailed an inquiry about changing my beneficiary designations, and it wasn't my signature on the return slip. It was David's. My knees buckled. I had to sit down. They were doing this quietly, piece by piece, moving my name off the paper while I was still breathing. Later that week, I began paying more attention, listening, watching. Clara had a habit of taking calls in the laundry room. One afternoon, I walked past and caught the end of a conversation. Yeah, he's not resisting, but we have to get it signed before tax season. David said if we wait too long, it'll get complicated. Another day, I found a brochure in the trash can under the sink. Silver Pines Retirement Village, where dignity meets comfort. Dignity. What they meant was silence. What they meant was obedience. That evening, I sat alone on the porch. The wind was warm. The sunset painted the sky with streaks of fire and lavender. And for the first time in weeks, I thought of Marjorie. I remembered how she used to hum while shelling peas, how she'd sit beside me on this very porch, legs tucked beneath her, sipping lemonade while David played with a toy truck in the dirt. He's got your stubbornness, she once said, smiling, but he's got my heart. I thought about that now, and it made me ache, because if she saw what he was doing, she'd cry. And if I told her what I was about to do, she might cry too. But there comes a point when sorrow turns to steel. And that night, something inside me settled. This wasn't just carelessness anymore. It was a plan, a quiet, calculated maneuver to move me out of their lives, out of their way, while pretending it was love. Well, if they could plan in silence, so could I. I pulled out my old black notebook, the one I used to keep home repair costs and appliance serial numbers in. I wrote down everything I'd found, the letter, the brochure, the overheard phrases, the date of that yellow sticky note. I made a list of my assets, my bank accounts, my safe deposit box key. Then I called the only person I still trusted with my whole heart, Larry, my late brother's oldest friend, a retired lawyer who once helped me write my first will. Larry, I said when he answered, I need to come see you. There was a pause. Is everything all right? No, I said, but it's going to be. He didn't ask questions. He just told me to come by Friday afternoon. That night, as I sat at the kitchen table again, watching David scroll through his phone and Clara feed the baby, I felt something I hadn't in a while. Control. They didn't know what I knew. They didn't know I'd seen the papers, that I'd heard their whispers, and I wasn't going to stop them. Not yet. I was going to let them keep talking, keep scheming, keep smiling at me with those hollow eyes, because the more rope they gave themselves, the tighter I could pull it when the time came. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. It was the eggs that finally did it. A simple morning. Clara had gone out for her Pilates class. David was home but distracted as usual. I stood by the stove, cracking eggs into a pan, same way I had for years. Slow, careful, always adding a pinch of salt and black pepper, just how Marjorie used to like it. David wandered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes and scrolling his phone. "Smells good," he muttered. "Want some?" I asked. "Sure," he said without looking up. I slid 2 eggs onto a plate, handed it to him. He took a bite, and right then, out of nowhere, he said it. "You forgot the salt again." I blinked. No, I didn't. He looked at me like I was losing it. "You sure?" I just stared. "Yes, David, I'm sure." He made a quiet huh sound and kept eating, but something snapped in me. It was that tone, that slow, deliberate doubt, that hint of concern mixed with superiority, like he was already writing my obituary in his head. I walked over to the table, sat down across from him. My hands were steady, but inside, a storm was gathering. "We need to talk," I said. He sighed, still chewing. "Now?" "Yes, now." He finally set the phone down. "Okay, what's going on?" "I know about the paperwork," I said. "The letters, the power of attorney." His mouth stopped moving. "I saw the brochures. I heard the phone calls. I'm not an idiot." He swallowed, looked away for a moment. "I was going to talk to you." "When?" "After you moved me into that place and started redecorating the house." He rubbed his temples. "You're making this bigger than it is." "No," I said, voice rising. "You made this big when you started plotting behind my back." He leaned forward now, frustrated. "Dad, come on. You've been forgetting things, getting tired all the time. You don't drive anymore. We're just trying to make sure that you get to control everything," I cut in. "That I disappear quietly, and you get to keep the house, the accounts, the insurance." "Don't twist this," he snapped. "I'm not stealing from you." "Then why lie to me?" I asked. "Why not come to me like a man?" He shook his head. "Because you don't listen. You live in the past. You think this house is some sacred temple, but it's just a building. Things change." "It's not just a building," I whispered. "It's where I buried your mother's ashes. It's where we raised you." He softened slightly, but just for a second. "We thought we were helping," he said. "Clara said it would be better this way, less pressure on you." I scoffed. "Clara, right." He caught that. "What's that supposed to mean?" I looked him square in the eyes. "It means ever since you married her, you've looked at me like a problem, like something to manage, not someone to respect." He stood up, pushing his chair back. "That's not fair. But it's true." He didn't answer. And in that silence I realized something important. He didn't deny it. Because deep down, he knew it too. Later that day, I stepped outside and ran into old Mrs. Green from across the street. She saw me walking with my cane and offered to help, but I told her I was fine. We chatted a while, just like we used to. She asked how I was settling in. I told her the truth. "I'm not." She gave me a long, understanding look. "David's changed," she said gently. "Since your wife passed. We all see it." That hit me. We all see it. It wasn't just me. The neighbors, the friends. They saw the difference, the distance, the coldness behind the charm. I thanked her, then walked on, letting the wind cool the fire in my chest. Back home, I sat at the kitchen table again. I looked around at the house I once built piece by piece, the one I remodeled after the tree fell through the roof in '98, the one where Marjorie sang while painting the nursery. This wasn't just a house. It was ours, and they wanted to turn it into theirs. I remembered something Marjorie used to say when the world got loud. "You don't have to shout to be heard, Frank. Sometimes silence has more weight." So I decided I wouldn't fight with raised voices anymore. I'd fight with action. That night, I pulled out my notebook again, made new entries, marked down dates, quotes, ideas. I reviewed my bank statements. I called the insurance company, confirmed all the beneficiaries. I found the title to the car, the deed to the house, every last legal scrap of proof that this life was mine. And then I started calling lawyers. 2 hung up or referred me to someone else. But the third, Elaine Thomas, estate attorney, listened carefully. "You're saying your son is attempting to secure power of attorney without your knowledge?" "Yes." Do you still have mental capacity to make legal decisions? Yes. Then let's get ahead of this, she said. Schedule an appointment. Bring everything. That phone call changed everything. I felt a calm come over me, because I finally had a plan. I wasn't going to scream or beg. I was going to write a new will, one they would never see coming. Elaine's office was on the second floor of a converted townhouse just outside of town. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and old books, comforting in a way, familiar, like a place that held stories, not just documents. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a patient smile. A younger woman, mid-40s maybe, but with gray streaks already running through her hair. The kind of face that had seen families break and mend 100 times over. "I'm glad you came, Mr. Darnell," she said. "Let's talk." We sat down in her office, sun slanting through the blinds, and I spread everything out on the table. Deed copies, bank statements, my current will, drawn up in 2009, back when David still called me Pop, and Clara was pregnant with their first. Elaine read in silence, occasionally underlining or scribbling notes in the margins. After a while, she looked up. "You understand what you're doing?" "I do. You're choosing to disinherit your son. That's a serious step." I nodded slowly. "He's already chosen to dishonor me. I'm just returning the favor, with dignity." She paused, then pushed her glasses up her nose. "And you want to include a no contest clause?" "Exactly. If he tries to fight it, everything goes to charity. The veterans' home, specifically." She smiled faintly. "That's airtight, but expect backlash. I've already had worse." We spent hours drafting the new document. Every word was weighed like gold. My modest assets, house, savings, a small investment account, were now directed toward two beneficiaries, the local Veterans Support Fund and the scholarship program at Marjorie's old elementary school, where she once volunteered every Thursday afternoon. As Elaine typed, I sat back and let my thoughts drift. I remembered Marjorie folding flyers for the school fundraiser. "Every kid deserves a chance," she used to say, "even if they come from nothing." She came from nothing. So did I. We built everything together, one check at a time, one scraped elbow at a time, one holiday dinner in a too-small kitchen. And now I was making sure her spirit outlived this mess. Elaine printed the draft and passed it to me. "You'll need 2 witnesses. We can arrange that." I nodded. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow." The next morning, I wore my Sunday best. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to. Black slacks, navy sweater, the gold watch Marjorie gave me on our 25th anniversary. I looked in the mirror before I left. The man staring back at me wasn't the broken father from 2 weeks ago. He was older, yes. A little slower, but he had steel in his spine. Elaine had her receptionist and a paralegal witness the signing. I held the pen firm, my signature clear and confident. No shaking, no hesitation. When it was done, she handed me a sealed copy and stored the original in her safe. "You've done the right thing," she said gently. I didn't smile. I just nodded. Walking back to the car, the air felt different. Lighter, almost. Not happy, but settled, like placing the final stone on a grave. At home that evening, David was in the living room watching TV. Clara was upstairs, bathing the baby. I sat across from him, still in my Sunday clothes. He glanced at me. "Fancy day?" Something like that. He didn't ask, and I didn't tell him. I didn't need to. That was the beauty of it. He still thought he had time, thought the papers he'd been shuffling and the calls he'd been making were quietly cementing his future. But I'd taken back my power, with a pen. I went to my room and placed the sealed will inside my suitcase, under my old flannel shirts. Then I pulled out the photo album, the one Clara said was taking up too much space. Inside was a lifetime. Marjorie holding David at the hospital, me building the backyard deck, family barbecues, Christmas mornings. One picture caught my eye. It was from 1995. David had just won the middle school science fair. I was standing behind him, my hands on his shoulders, Marjorie beside me, glowing with pride. I traced the edge of the photo with my finger. He wasn't always this way. There was a time when he looked up to me, when he called me after every job interview, when he asked me how to fix a leaky sink, when he came to me first, not last. But something changed along the way. Maybe it was the money, maybe Clara, maybe just the slow erosion of gratitude into greed. Whatever it wasn't my fault. That's what the will symbolized now. Not revenge, not cruelty, but clarity. A final declaration that I would not be used, discarded, or forgotten. I wasn't waiting to be pushed into silence anymore. I'd written my truth, in ink that couldn't be erased. It was a Thursday when David walked into my room with a manila folder tucked under his arm, and that same forced, cheerful tone he always used when he wanted something. "Dad," he said, rapping his knuckles lightly on the doorframe. "Got a few things I'd like you to look at." I was reading the paper. Didn't even glance up. "What kind of things?" "Just some forms. Financial housekeeping, you know, standard stuff." That phrase, standard stuff, landed in my chest like a rock. I folded the paper slowly and set it aside. "Let's see it." He stepped in, laid the folder on the desk near my reading chair. Inside were neatly printed documents: a living trust amendment, a durable power of attorney, and a letter addressed to the state of California's Department of Aging. I picked up the first page, scanned the words, my name, his name, language about asset transfers, conservatorship readiness, medical rights. "You want me to sign these?" David smiled too quickly. "Just a formality, really. Clara and I are looking at refinancing the mortgage, and the house is technically still in your name. This'll just make it easier for us to manage if anything ever happens to you." There it was, the lie, as polished and convenient as a brochure. I stared at him. "So you're saying this is for my benefit?" "Of course," he said, as if he were explaining it to a child. "And the clause here," I tapped a paragraph, "about immediate authority over all bank accounts? That's just a coincidence?" His expression faltered, just for a second. "Dad, come on," he said, now trying to sound wounded. "You're making this into a drama. I'm just trying to help." "Help yourself," I said, standing slowly. He blinked. "What?" I pointed to the door. "Get out. Dad, out." The calm in my voice seemed to scare him more than shouting ever could. He stood there, unmoving, so I walked right up to him and picked up the folder. I didn't tear it. I didn't burn it. I simply held it in front of him. "I see you," I said, "and your plans, and your lies." He swallowed, eyes darting. "You're being irrational." "No, David. I've been too rational, too quiet. But not anymore." I handed the folder back and walked past him. In the hallway, Clara was halfway down the stairs, holding the baby. She'd heard the whole thing. Her lips were tight, eyes cold. We locked eyes for a second. She didn't speak, just turned and went back up the stairs. I went outside, took a deep breath, and sat on the front steps. The sunset bathed the neighborhood in a warm gold, but I felt nothing but frost inside. A few minutes later, I heard the door close behind me. David was gone. That night, I didn't sleep much. I stayed up packing. Not clothes, not mementos, documents. The revised will, insurance forms, account statements, all neatly labeled and placed in a weatherproof folder. By morning, I had everything I needed. It was time to end this charade. I called Elaine. "I'm ready," I said. "For what?" "For them to know the truth." She paused, then said, "I'll be here." But first, I made one last stop, at the cemetery. Marjorie's grave was just as I left it. The headstone clean, the rose bush we planted blooming with little red flowers. I knelt slowly, feeling the ache in my knees, and placed a hand on the granite. "Tomorrow, they'll know everything," I whispered. "I wish you were here to see it." And for a brief moment, I imagined she was, smiling, proud. The next day was Clara's birthday lunch, an elaborate affair she insisted on hosting at a winery just outside town. They'd invited all their friends, a few extended relatives, and even neighbors. They didn't invite me, but I showed up anyway, wearing a suit, with my folder. People stared as I entered the banquet room. Clara's smile froze the moment she saw me. David stood up slowly, confused, embarrassed. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "I'm here to give a toast." There was silence. Tension hung in the air. "I won't be long," I said. I walked up to the head table, unfolded my folder, and pulled out the will. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the new will, as of last week." Clara gasped softly. David's face drained of color. "I have removed David as my heir," I continued. "Every cent I own, this house, my accounts, the insurance, is going elsewhere. To veterans, to children, to people who remember what respect looks like." A few people murmured. One woman whispered, "Oh my God." "And just in case either of you think about contesting it," I added, "there's a clause. If you do, the entire estate will go to charity." I looked directly at Clara. That includes the refinancing deal you were hoping for. Then, at David. And the power of attorney? Null and void. I never signed. He opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. I trusted you once, son. But trust doesn't mean silence. Not anymore. I turned to the guests. Apologies for interrupting your afternoon, but sometimes truth needs a stage. And with that, I walked out, calm, dignified, prepared for whatever came next. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I didn't plan to return to the house after the winery confrontation. Not immediately. Instead, I drove to a small cafe on the edge of town, the kind Marjorie used to love. Wooden booths, chalkboard menu, and an old jukebox humming quietly in the corner. I sat there for hours, sipping weak coffee and watching the door, though I didn't know who I was expecting. By late afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from David. Come home, we need to talk. No apology, no explanation, just that tone, like I owed him the courtesy of a response. But I went. When I pulled into the driveway, David was already outside, pacing like a man rehearsing a speech. Clara stood near the porch, arms crossed, brows tight. I got out slowly, folder still in hand. David walked toward me. You embarrassed us. Did I lie? He flinched at that. There were better ways to handle this. You mean private ones, quieter ones. He shook his head, frustrated. You don't understand how this looks. People think we're monsters. I stepped forward. I gave you everything, David. My house, my support, years of patience, and you still tried to take what little I had left, like I was some old fool drooling in a wheelchair. I was protecting you. No, I said calmly. You were positioning yourself, lining things up behind my back so you could take over, shove me into a quiet room, and call it love. His face turned red, mouth opening and closing. Then Clara stepped in. You think we wanted this life, she snapped. Living with your routines, your dusty rules, your control over every room in that house? We were trying to build a future, our future. And my role in it? I asked. Just a signature, a silent presence to make the paperwork smoother? She didn't answer. I looked up at the house, my house, the one I built, the one I painted with Marjorie, hammer in one hand, hope in the other. I should have kicked you out the day you called my photo albums clutter. David let out a bitter laugh. So that's what this is about? Sentimental junk? No, I said. It's about the people who walk past a man every day, eat his food, sleep under his roof, and still have the nerve to call him a burden. He was silent. For a moment, I saw it in his eyes. That boy from long ago. The one who ran to me with scraped knees and science projects. But it flickered out too quickly. You're going to regret this, he muttered. No, David, I already did. For years, but not anymore. I turned and opened the folder one last time. This is a notarized letter removing you from all financial decisions tied to my estate. It's filed, witnessed, and legally binding. You won't get a dime, now or after I'm gone. His voice trembled. You'd rather give it to strangers? They're not strangers, I said. They're people who won't use my kindness as leverage. Clara folded her arms. So what now? You going to kick us out? I met her eyes. No, you'll leave when you're ready. But the deed's in my name, and once you're out, the locks change. Her face went pale. David stared at me, stunned. He was beginning to understand it wasn't just talk this time, that I hadn't come unhinged, I'd come awake. I walked past them and into the house. Inside, everything felt still. For once, there were no TVs blaring, no kitchen noises, no toys scattered across the hallway. Just quiet. I went to the living room, took the family photo down from the mantel and slipped it into a drawer. I wasn't erasing the past. I was just ending the chapter. 10 minutes later, I heard the front door open and close. They were gone. No shouting, no slammed doors, just silence. And in that silence, for the first time in years, I felt peace. I sat in my old recliner, laid the folder on my lap, and let the weight of it all settle. This wasn't vengeance. It was truth. And finally, it had been spoken. The quiet that settled over the house wasn't like anything I'd felt before. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was the absence of tension, of walking on eggshells, of being invisible in my own home. It was peace. It was loneliness. Sometimes they come wrapped in the same package. The day after David and Clara left, I stood in the middle of the kitchen and didn't know what to do with myself. The house felt bigger somehow, echoing with old sounds. Marjorie humming while washing dishes, David laughing as a boy when I let him lick the batter from the spoon, even the ticking of the old wall clock I took down after it stopped years ago. I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at the breakfast nook, watched the sparrows flit across the backyard fence. No texts, no calls, not from David, not from Clara, not even from their friends who once waved politely at me from the driveway. But I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want explanations. What I wanted was silence I could trust. Later that week, the neighbors began to talk. Not rudely, not loudly, but I saw it in their eyes. The hesitant nods, the forced small talk, the subtle way some avoided looking me in the eye. Then came Elaine. She showed up Thursday morning, holding a brown paper bag and 2 coffees. "I figured you didn't have anyone nagging you about breakfast," she said, stepping inside like she still lived here. I smiled. "You figured right." We sat on the porch, eating bagels in the quiet. "Word's gotten around," she said gently. "I'm sure." She sipped her coffee. "Some folks think you finally lost it. Others say you were too patient for too long." "And what do you think?" Elaine looked at me. "I think you're finally standing in your own truth. That takes guts." I nodded, not trusting my voice for a moment. "I miss her, you know," I finally said. "Marjorie." Elaine placed her hand on mine. "She'd be proud of you." I looked out across the street. I wish I knew that for sure. "You do." That evening I pulled out an old photo album. Not the one Clara boxed up for the attic, the one I kept hidden behind the bookshelf. It was faded, some pages torn, but the memories were intact. There she was, Marjorie in her apron, flower on her nose, holding David as a baby. There I was, too, with more hair and fewer worries. I didn't cry. I just sat there, turning pages, whispering stories to a woman who could no longer answer, but who I knew was listening all the same. That night as I lay in bed, I remembered something she once told me during one of David's teenage tantrums. Let them pull away if they must. Just don't lose yourself chasing after them. I hadn't listened then, but maybe I had now. The next few days brought small changes. I cleaned out the garage, donated the toys, took down the live, laugh, love sign Clara had hung above the fireplace, replaced it with Marjorie's landscape painting, the one David called dated. I went walking again, the way I used to, down the block, past the school where David once played Little League, past the house where I fixed the neighbor's fence for free. Some people waved, some didn't. But one person caught up to me near the corner store. It was Max, the retired Navy guy who lived 3 doors down. "Hey," he said, "heard what happened." I braced myself for pity, but instead he smiled. "Took guts. Damn guts." I chuckled. "Thanks," he nodded. "You ever think about joining the vets meetup at the rec center? Tuesdays and Thursdays. We mostly gripe and play cards. Sounds like therapy with caffeine." He laughed. "Exactly. I'll think about it." When I got home that day, something inside me shifted. A quiet realization that maybe I wasn't as alone as I thought. Maybe the family I'd raised had moved on, but a different kind of family, a chosen one, was waiting just outside my door. That evening I called the lawyer, asked about the final filings, made sure every clause was airtight. Then I asked a different question. "Is there a way," I said, "to set up a charitable trust through the house?" He paused. "That's a big step. What do you have in mind?" "I'm not sure yet," I said, "but I want this house to mean something again, to be more than a place that raised a family who forgot it." There was silence on the line. Then, "We can work on that." And just like that, a new idea took root. One that had nothing to do with bitterness or revenge. Something better. Something lasting. The house that held my pain might just hold my purpose too. The next morning I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. Real purpose. Not the kind that comes from routine or obligation, but the kind that settles in your bones and whispers, "You're not done yet." I made myself a strong cup of coffee, pulled out a notepad, and sat at the kitchen table just like I used to when planning repairs or family vacations. Only this time, I wasn't fixing leaky pipes or figuring out which park had the best picnic tables. This time, I was designing the future of the house, Marjorie's house. I stared at the blank page and asked myself one question. What did this place mean to us? It wasn't just walls and furniture. It was safety. It was love. It was second chances. And maybe now, it could be that for someone else too. I thought about all the people I'd known who had nowhere to go once life turned on them. Veterans like Max, older folks living off pensions too small to stretch, even young people trying to start over. That was it. A house for second chances, a place where people could live, work, heal, and maybe even belong. I scribbled the title across the top of the page, Marjorie's House. The name brought a lump to my throat. I could almost hear her voice, gentle and steady, as if she were sitting across from me, nodding her quiet approval. That afternoon, I drove to the community center. Max was there, holding court over a game of dominoes with two other old-timers and a woman named Helen who wore a bright red sweater and sharper wit than anyone else at the table. "You showed up," Max said with a grin. I said I'd think about it. I thought fast. They made room at the table. After a few rounds of small talk, I brought up the idea. "I've got space," I said. "A whole house, really. Too quiet now. I'm thinking of turning it into something useful, a kind of home, not permanent, but something for people who need a bridge." They looked at me, silent at first. Then Helen leaned forward. "You mean like transitional housing?" "Exactly. Only with dignity. No charity lines, no judgment." Max nodded slowly. "I know two guys off the top of my head who jump at that. One sleeps in his truck, the other's bouncing between couches." The others murmured in agreement. "I'd need help," I said. "Connections, maybe even a board." "We know people," Helen said. "And I've got more organizational skills than I know what to do with." Just like that, the plan took on breath. By the end of the week, I'd set up a meeting with my lawyer. We talked zoning laws, liability, local grants. He was skeptical at first, but the more I explained, the more he listened. "You're serious about this," he said. "As serious as I've ever been." We drafted a basic plan. I'd retain ownership of the house, but establish a nonprofit to manage the residency and programming. The trust I'd created after cutting David out would serve as the financial backbone. "Are you sure you want to leave nothing to your son?" he asked. I took a deep breath. I left him everything that mattered. He's the one who walked away. By the following month, the project had a name, a legal foundation, and a list of possible residents. Elaine helped with logistics. Max recruited volunteers. Helen practically bulldozed the city clerk's office to expedite the permits. Every day, someone stopped by the house, sometimes to drop off supplies, sometimes just to talk. And for the first time in a long while, the rooms echoed with voices again. Not David's, but laughter, ideas, purpose. We cleared out the spare bedrooms, painted walls, fixed up the basement for community dinners. One Sunday, Max brought his nephew to install ramps for accessibility. The house was changing. So was I. One evening, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset melt into the fields. The sky was soft and purple, just like the night Marjorie and I first kissed on that same porch swing. "Almost ready, love," I whispered. As if in answer, a breeze rustled the wind chimes above me, hers. The ones David once tried to take down because they were too noisy. Now their sound was music again. Not long after, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting instantly. David. I hesitated before opening it. Just a few lines inside. No apology, no rant. Just, "I heard what you're doing. Hope it works out. Don't worry. We won't be coming back." That was it. And oddly enough, that was enough. No begging, no threats. Just closure. I folded the letter, placed it in the drawer with the photo album, and sat quietly for a long time. David made his choice. So had I. And mine was finally leading somewhere. By the time summer rolled in, Marjorie's house wasn't just an idea. It was a home, not a grand one, not polished or shiny, but warm, honest, alive. The first resident was Roy, a Vietnam vet with a bad knee and a worse relationship with his daughter. He arrived with 2 duffel bags, a battered hat, and an apology for being trouble. He cried the first night when he found clean sheets and a door that locked. Next came Teresa, a young mother escaping a marriage that had left her silent and jumpy. Her son, Danny, followed her everywhere at first, wide-eyed and clutching a stuffed lion with one ear torn. I taught him how to patch the screen door one afternoon. He didn't say much, just nodded solemnly and handed me the screwdriver when I asked. Within a month, we had 6 people living under the roof, 3 veterans, 2 women from the shelter network, and Danny. They took turns with chores. We ate dinner together most nights, and somehow the house filled with a kind of harmony I hadn't heard since Marjorie's cooking filled the kitchen. It wasn't perfect. People argued. Dishes got broken, but they apologized. They worked it out, and they stayed. Elaine dropped by often. She ran workshops on budgeting, resume writing, even taught Teresa how to drive using my old truck. Max became our unofficial handyman and counselor. He had a way of sitting with people that made them talk, like they were safe, finally. Helen? She made us get a chalkboard calendar for the dining room. Structure, she said, tapping it with her red pen. Without it, you've got chaos in clean clothes. The chalkboard filled with appointments, birthdays, quotes, and rotating dinner duties. It was beautiful. One Sunday afternoon, as I was trimming the hedges out front, a car pulled into the driveway. I didn't recognize it, but I felt a flicker in my chest when the door opened, and a familiar figure stepped out. Sarah, my granddaughter. She looked older, taller. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, and she wore a leather jacket that made her look like someone who'd seen the world and come back wiser. "Hi, Grandpa," she said. For a moment, I couldn't speak. She stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't stiff or polite. It was warm, real. "I heard from someone," she said. "About the house." I nodded. "You came all this way?" "I needed to see it. I needed to see you." I offered her a seat on the porch swing. She looked around at the laughter spilling from the windows, the potted plants blooming along the steps, the new mailbox someone painted with little yellow daisies. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "It feels like her." "She'd have liked you here," I said. "She always said you had her eyes." Sarah smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Dad doesn't know I'm here." I figured. I don't know what happened between you two, but I remember the man who built me a dollhouse when I was 6, even though you had the flu. I remember the pancakes shaped like animals, the way Grandma smiled when you danced with her in the kitchen. She paused, eyes wet. "That's the man I came to see." I couldn't speak for a moment, just placed my hand gently over hers. "You're welcome here any time," I said. "Not because you're my granddaughter, because you're good." She stayed for dinner, sat beside Roy, and helped Danny with his peas. Teresa smiled at her like an old friend. Helen roped her into a calendar update. By dessert, she was laughing. I caught her watching the room, eyes full of something between nostalgia and wonder. "This is family," she said later, as we sat on the porch under a pale moon. "Isn't it?" "Not by blood," I said, "but by something better. Choice." Sarah wiped a tear and nodded. "Maybe one day I'll come back for good." "Any time." As the weeks passed, the house continued to breathe. We built a vegetable garden out back. Danny adopted a stray cat and named it Pickles. Roy taught me how to play chess again, beat me 3 times in a row. Teresa started taking night classes. Max began hosting movie nights on the patio with a projector I didn't know he owned. And every now and then, Sarah would call. Sometimes she'd visit. Never once did she bring up David. Neither did I. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the scent of fresh basil wafted from the kitchen, I sat on the porch, sipping iced tea. Laughter rolled through the screen door. Music played faintly from someone's speaker. I closed my eyes and imagined Marjorie beside me. "You were right," I whispered. "It wasn't about blood. It was about love." A breeze swept across the porch. The wind chimes danced softly in response, and I knew, deep in my chest, that this, finally, was home again. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when it happened. I'd just finished mopping the kitchen. Teresa had insisted on deep cleaning day every 2 weeks, and I was sitting with a glass of lemonade when the doorbell rang. Usually, folks came to the back entrance by the patio. This was someone who wanted formality. I wiped my hands, went to the front door, and opened it. David stood there, gray at the temples now, a little heavier in the face. He wore a crisp button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow like he used to when he was nervous. A car idled behind him in the driveway. Clean, silver, probably rented. We stared at each other. I didn't say a word. "I wasn't sure if you'd open," he said. "You're lucky I did." He swallowed and looked past me into the house. I didn't offer to let him in. "I heard about the place," he said. "Someone showed me an article online, a local write-up about Marjorie's house. Said you were helping people." I nodded once, slowly. "Looks like it," he added, forcing a small smile that didn't reach his eyes. There was silence. "I didn't come to argue," he said finally. "I'm not here to ask for anything." "Good," I said, "because there's nothing left for you here." That hit him harder than he expected. His shoulders slumped just a bit. "I know," he said quietly. I figured. The car engine hummed in the background. I could see someone in the passenger seat, a woman, maybe his wife. She didn't look up. David shifted on his feet. "I came because I needed to say something." I waited. "I was angry for a long time," he began, "about how things turned out after Mom died, about how much pressure I felt to step into your shoes. But instead of talking to you, I blamed you. I thought you were being controlling. I thought I deserved more." His voice cracked a little. He looked away. "When I said what I said, called you a thief, I don't even remember why anymore. I was just bitter and stupid." Still, I didn't speak. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry." That word, sorry, hung in the air like dust after demolition. Not loud, not dramatic, just lingering. I thought about the man who stood in front of me, my son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, who used to run into my arms after school, the man who'd called me a liar in my own home, who tried to take what I'd built, not just the house, but the legacy. And now, here he was, just a man carrying regret. "I believe you're sorry," I said finally. "But that doesn't undo what's been done." "I know." I looked at him for a long time. "I buried your mother in that garden. I built this place for our family. But when things got hard, you didn't just walk away. You tried to erase me. You didn't make a mistake, David. You made a choice." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "You raised a daughter with good instincts," I added. "Sarah's been here. She helped paint the back room." David blinked, surprised. "She never told me." "She didn't have to." He was quiet for a long time. "I miss her. I miss you." "I don't miss the man you became," I said, "but I do mourn the boy I raised." A long pause followed. May I see the house?" he asked, voice low. I glanced back through the doorway. Roy was on the couch, reading. Danny and Teresa were at the dining table, sorting books. Helen stood in the kitchen, bossing Max around about spice racks. It wasn't his house anymore, and he wasn't part of this world. "No," I said, gently but firmly. "This isn't your place now." David looked like he might argue, but he didn't. Instead, he nodded. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This is for Sarah, if you see her." I hesitated, then took it. He turned to go. Just before he reached the car, I called out, "David." He turned. "I do wish things had been different, but I won't apologize for protecting what's sacred." "I understand," he said softly. Then he got into the car, and it pulled away. I stood there a moment longer, the envelope in my hand, the breeze stirring the chimes above the door. Inside the house, laughter broke out, probably Max telling another one of his exaggerated war stories. I went back in. Later that evening, I sat on the porch and opened the envelope. It was a short note, in David's handwriting. "Tell her I'm proud of her, even if I never earned the right to say it myself." No signature, no address. I placed it in the same drawer as his last letter. Not for me, but maybe one day Sarah would want to read it. As the sky darkened, I looked out at the garden. The tomatoes were ripening. The basil was thick and fragrant. Marjorie would have been proud. David had come, and he'd left. But this house, this family, they stayed. The morning of the ceremony, I woke before the sun. Not out of nerves, no. Those faded with age, but something deeper. A stirring in the bones. The same feeling I'd get before every big moment in my life. My wedding day, the birth of my children, the morning I signed the mortgage on this house with Marjorie's hand in mine. I stepped outside barefoot, let the dew kiss my feet as I walked the garden path. The lavender she loved was in full bloom, and the tomatoes practically burst on the vine. I stood in front of her little stone, beneath the oak where we'd scattered some of her ashes. "Today's the day, love," I whispered. "They're coming. The whole town. Even the mayor." The mayor. I chuckled. Never thought he'd be shaking my hand. By 9, the front yard was humming with movement. Folding chairs were set up. A podium stood near the porch steps. Streamers fluttered between trees, and the smell of fresh-baked cinnamon rolls wafted from the kitchen. People came in droves. Neighbors, veterans, folks from the shelter, church friends I hadn't seen in years, reporters with notepads, children playing tag in the yard. Each one was greeted with a smile, a name tag, and a warm welcome, courtesy of Helen and Max, who ran the event like generals. Teresa wore a pale blue dress and held Danny's hand proudly. Roy wore his service medals. Sarah showed up in that same leather jacket, but this time she brought a plate of lemon squares and hugged everyone like she belonged, because she did. I stood on the porch when they called my name. The mayor said a few words, something about community, about legacy. He handed me a certificate with a gold seal and shook my hand for the cameras. But that wasn't the moment that mattered. The moment that mattered came next, when I stepped up to the podium, looked out over the sea of faces, faces that had known hardship, betrayal, recovery, and hope. I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Whole. I didn't build this house alone, I began, voice steady. I built it with Marjorie, with time, with love. I built it thinking I was building something to pass down through blood. A few heads nodded. But blood, I said, doesn't always mean loyalty, or kindness, or home. Sometimes it's just a reminder of what could have been. I paused, eyes scanning the crowd. I saw Sarah, her eyes locked on mine. I saw Danny leaning against Roy, sucking his thumb. I saw tears in Helen's eyes. I lost a lot before I found this place again, I said, but I gained more than I ever expected. I gestured to the house behind me. This isn't just a house, it's Marjorie's house, a place for anyone who's been told they don't belong, anyone who's been cast aside, forgotten, or hurt, a beat. And it will remain that way long after I'm gone. Applause broke like a soft wave, not thunderous, just steady, real. After the speech, we gave tours. Folks wandered through the bedrooms, admired the garden, sat in the living room where the walls now bore photographs, black and white portraits of residents, smiling, rebuilding their lives. Each room had a plaque above the door. Marjorie's kitchen, Max's workshop, Teresa and Danny's room, Roy's library, Sarah's study. Yes, I gave her a key. She didn't ask for one. I just handed it to her the week before, and she held it to her chest like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Later that day, as the sun dipped and the guests trickled out, I sat on the porch again. The wind moved softly. The laughter faded into comfortable silence. Sarah came to sit beside me, sipping iced tea from a mason jar. "You did something rare," she said. "You turned pain into something good." "I just followed your grandma's voice," I said. Every time I wanted to give up, I'd hear her say, "Not yet, James. Keep going." Sarah smiled. "I think she'd be proud." I looked out over the yard. "I know she is." The porch light flickered on. Max waved from inside. Helen called for someone to help with leftovers. Roy snored faintly on the porch swing. Danny curled up beside him. Home. That night, I wrote a letter, addressed it simply, to Marjorie. "We did it, love. The house is full again, not of silence or resentment, but of music, footsteps, laughter. It's been a hard road, but I'm not alone anymore. I found family in the most unexpected places. And though my own son lost his way, I found peace in the people who chose to stay. Your garden's still blooming. Your recipes are still being cooked. And your name? It's on every welcome mat, every plate of food, every healed heart that walks through this door. Thank you for believing in me." I kept going, just like you said. I folded the letter and placed it under her stone in the garden. Then I stood beneath the stars, and for the first time in years, I felt completely home.